Hello and welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to deploy a subnet to which we can deploy our future EC2 instance. So, let's get started. As you can see here in the docs, it's pretty straightforward, although there are a few more options we're going to want to add. One of them, and if you scroll down here, is map public IP on launch. Default is false. We want to make sure that our instance receives a public IP address whenever we launch into the subnet. So we'll want to ensure we add that. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so right here under my VPC, we're going to add another resource, and that resource is AWS_subnet, just like so. And then let's go ahead and name it. I'll just use MTC_public_subnet, just like so. And you don't always have to add a prefix like this. Although I've been doing it for so long, if I did not add this prefix, this course would be way too long due to all the errors I'd make. So, for consistency's sake, I'm just going to keep this MTC prefix on all of my resources. All right, so let's go ahead and open and close those resource braces. And what we need to do is provide a VPC ID. Now, as you remember, when we ran our Terraform state list, we've got a list of our resources. And this is how we want to access this VPC resource. So what we're going to do is AWS VPC.mtc_VPC, which again matches this as well. And since this is another resource, it's like a variable, it's not a string, so you're not going to quote this. This is a reference to a resource, so you don't need to add quotes. And then what we need to do is just specify an ID. So if I do the Terraform state show AWS VPC.mtc_VPC, just like so, we can see that it has an ID attribute. And that's the ID that we need for our subnet. So we just specify that .id right there, and that's how you're going to reference most of the resources that you have to reference from other resources. So next we need to provide our CIDR block, and that's going to equal 10.123, and I'm just going to say .1.0/24, which of course is one of the subnets within this /16. And then after that, we're going to add our map public IP on launch. That's a long one there. Equals true, and since this is a Boolean, it's also not quoted. And then we need to provide an availability zone, just like so. And that'll be US West, and we're just going to use 2A, or at least I am, because I know A is probably good to go. There are ways to use what are called data sources to ensure that this is always correct, especially if you're using multiple availability zones, but we're not going to dive into that now, but feel free, of course, to research that if you are curious. So next up, we're going to add tags, and that name equals dev public. We'll just go with that. So the VPC we just named dev, and we'll just name this here as dev public so that we know that it's a public subnet. Again, map public IP on launch equals true is a good reason for us to want to make sure we label it correctly so we don't accidentally put sensitive resources in this subnet, which of course could cause a security nightmare. All right, so that's all we have to do for this subnet. Let's go ahead and run our Terraform plan. All right, we've got one resource to add, so that's good. An AWS subnet is going to get added. As you can see, everything we have specified is listed here. And of course, certain things like the ID are known after apply. So let's go ahead and run a Terraform apply. And then I'm just going to add auto approve. You're not always going to do this, but if you're running a plan first, it's usually pretty safe to go ahead and just auto approve it and not have to type that yes every single time. This especially is useful in automation. So I'll go ahead and run this. All right, one added, everything looks successful. So I'll go ahead and click on this sprocket next to resources, which again is in the AWS pane. And I'll go ahead and type subnet. As you can see, we actually do not have subnets available. This is a limitation of this AWS plugin. So we're not going to worry about it. But it looks like that subnet creation was successful. And of course, you can always go into the AWS console to verify. But everything looks good from my end, so go ahead and mark this lesson complete. Come on back to the next one and let's continue the course.